Wisconsin Pipeline Invasion 101 for people who are new to the issue and want to learn more about the tar sands pipelines through Wisconsin. We will be recording this video or this presentation, but we will stop recording after the presentation. We'll have half an hour for questions and answers, and that will not be recorded so people can feel comfortable asking their questions without it being recorded. And after the presentation, you will receive an email with a follow-up form to fill, a little evaluation to let us know what you thought of the presentation, and there will be options there to ask additional questions if yours didn't get answered or you thought about them later, and as well as other ways to provide feedback and let us know if you want to get more involved or learn more about the project. So this presentation is a joint presentation between WISE, the Wisconsin Safe Energy Alliance, which I'll talk about in a minute, and the Sierra Club. My name is Elizabeth Ward, and I am the Conservation Programs Coordinator for the Sierra Club, and the Sierra Club is a member organization of the Wisconsin Safe Energy Alliance. And I'll let my co-presenter introduce herself.
Hi, this is Mary Beth Elliott. I am the tar sands lead for 350 Madison, and I work with Elizabeth and others at the Sierra Club, and I'm also a member of the WISE Alliance.
And as you joined after I mentioned it before, you are all on mute, and you'll stay on mute. If you have a question or a concern, there's a little icon that allows you to either raise your hand or you can chat us in the chat box, and we can help you if you're having technical difficulties. And when we get to questions after the presentation, we can either unmute you or you can ask your question over chat. So we're going to get started. As I mentioned, this is a joint presentation with both the Sierra Club and also the Wisconsin Safe Energy Alliance. And if you're unfamiliar, it's an umbrella group made up of a number of other groups, including 350 Madison, Sierra Club, but also groups concerned about the safety of the pipelines like Brave Wisconsin and other groups along the line, as well as landowner groups. And our main mission is to educate and provide resources to groups concerned about the pipeline. And so that's whether or not it's health and safety concerns or education, community rights or landowner rights or property rights, and then environmental concerns. I'm going to first start out a little bit just talking about what's inside these pipelines, which is tar sands oil. And in case you're unfamiliar, the way tar sands oil works is it first starts underneath the boreal forest, which you've probably been hearing about right now because unfortunately this is the same area, Fort McMurray in Canada, that is unfortunately going through some wildfires right now. But one of the little known facts about the boreal forest, aside from being beautiful as you can see, is that it is actually the largest carbon sink in the world, bigger than the Amazon rainforest. In order to get to the tar sands oil, the first step is to remove all of what Enbridge calls the overburden in order to be able to get that oil underneath. That alone is why NASA scientist James Hansen refers to tar sands oil development as game over for the climate. Because removing all of the forested areas in the boreal forest and all of that carbon sequestration right there means there's no way to ensure that that oil will not be more carbon intensive than any other form of oil, and therefore we can't move forward with it and still protect the future of our planet from climate change. Once it's dug up, you get this texture. Some refer to it like peanut butter, others like molasses, but it's really this thick, sandy substance, and they have to mix it with chemicals called diluents, which Mary Beth is going to talk about in a minute, and that allows it to have the consistency that lets it flow through the pipeline. This alone poses a few safety risks because of the nature of this oil. It makes it so that one study found tar sands oil pipelines actually tend to rupture or spill more often than what they call traditional pipelines. So the oil is extracted in Canada, and the path that it takes to get to Wisconsin, you can see on this map here, there's actually a series of pipelines that come into Wisconsin into Superior. Superior is this hub for the Enbridge network. They actually call it the heart of the network, and that is where all these pipelines come in. Of those pipelines, there are plans for at least 4 either bigger pipelines or brand new pipelines. As you can see here, these are 4 pipelines that will come into Superior. What this means is that Enbridge is looking to bring in a lot more oil, almost 2 million barrels per day of oil into Superior. Once in Superior, it's going to have to flow out of Superior, which means through the heart of Wisconsin. These pipelines have also had a lot of concerns in Minnesota and the other states they passed, especially from tribes. So tribes are joining together in northern Minnesota right now because it passes a lot of either tribal land or land that tribes are supposed to be able to use their treaty rights for, so hunting, fishing, and gathering wild rice. And these pipelines threaten that land. So we're seeing a lot of people forming together in northern Minnesota. Once they get to Superior, these pipelines, there are 5 of them. One that's gotten quite a bit of news those last couple of years, it's Line 5. That's the pipeline that goes over the northern part of Wisconsin through the Upper Peninsula and under the Straits of the Mackinac. So that's, this picture here is taken by the National Wildlife Federation, and as you can see, it's exposed there on the lake bed, and any spill that would happen there would be absolutely devastating. It's one of the places where the water is oscillating the fastest because it's where the 2 lakes meet, and it's a really important place for the entire Great Lakes network. Of course, we know the Great Lakes network provides drinking water to 42 million people, so anything that happened there could be absolutely catastrophic. The other 4 pipelines, as you can see, travel down south through the heart of Wisconsin, where they leave Wisconsin and go into Illinois. Of these 4 pipelines, 3 are oil pipelines. The 6A is the oldest pipeline. It was put in Wisconsin in the 60s, and since then we've gotten Line 14 and 61, which most people are probably familiar with because it's on the path to becoming the world's largest tar sands pipeline outside of Russia, so at 1.2 million barrels per day. For context, the Keystone Pipeline was 800,000 barrels per day, so this will be 1.5 Keystones. The 4th pipeline is what's called the Delian Pipeline, so it's those chemicals they add to the tar sands. Once they get to the refineries, that is extracted out and sent back north to Canada, and Mary Beth is going to be talking about those, the diluent chemicals in a second. Now, 2 of the 2 new pipelines scheduled to come into Superior, one is the Sandpiper Pipeline. That's actually carrying fracked oil from North Dakota into Superior, and then what Enbridge is calling the Line 3 replacement. But it's not really a replacement in that it's a brand new pipeline and actually a different corridor than the existing Line 3, and it'll carry double the amount of oil. These 2 pipelines together will be almost 1 million barrels of oil per day. And we recently learned that Enbridge has announced this, they're calling it the Line 61 Twin, which means it'll be a second pipeline right next to Line 61. If it's the same size as Line 61, that means we'll have the 2 largest tar sands pipelines in the world outside of Russia going through the heart of Wisconsin. One of the other causes for concern about these new pipelines is the impact of eminent domain changes that happened last year as part of the state budget. One of the last-minute maneuvers that went into the state budget was a change that expanded eminent domain, so it was no longer just public entities and corporations. It's public entities and all business entities could use eminent domain. Enbridge is a limited liability partnership, which means they weren't able to use eminent domain before, but with this change, they are going to be able potentially to use eminent domain. One of the other big causes of concern, and through an open records request, Wisconsin Public Radio actually found it was Enbridge that was behind this change. One of the other causes for concern is the risk of a spill, and I'm going to turn it over to Mary Beth Elliott here, who will be talking about that.
Here what we see on the left is this huge, ugly, gashed pipeline. This is the pipeline that ruptured July 25th, 2010 and spilled almost 1 million gallons into the Kalamazoo River. It was only a week or 10 days before this that Enbridge representatives had solemnly sworn in front of a congressional panel that they were very safe. It was very unlikely to have spills, and if there were any kind of a spill or rupture, they would be able to shut down from their control room in Canada any offending pipeline within minutes. Well, in fact, what happened on July 25th was that there was a rupture. You can see it was a pretty bad rupture. In the control room, which I believe is in Calgary, if I remember correctly, in Canada, they kept dickering back and forth. Should we turn it back on, back off to kind of flush through a bubble or whatever the heck they thought it was? But in fact, the whole time it was just leaking into the Kalamazoo River. And this went on for 17 hours, and more than 1 million gallons of tar sands oil spilled into the area. And unfortunately, no one in the vicinity, not the first responders, firefighters, inhabitants, anybody was told that this was a different kind of oil. This was not just regular old crude oil, and that really made a big difference because it's very difficult to clean up. And in fact, the spill cleanup from this was $1.2 billion as estimated by Enbridge. The National Academy of Sciences has recently put out a study which made a comparison between spills of what we consider classic crude oil, like you'd see out of a Texas gusher in the old days, pushing up into the air. Well, that's regular old crude oil. Tar sands, as Elizabeth has described, are quite different, and it's this gummy, ducky stuff with diluents, and it has much different characteristics. And in the National Academy of Sciences study, they pointed out that when tar sands do spill, a lot of things happen over the course of time, hours or days. It undergoes something called weathering, which means that the diluents, which are volatile organic hydrocarbons, they volatilize, they evaporate into the air, sometimes very quickly, which can actually poison people. We'll talk about those health effects. And what happens with the leftover tar sands is that they sink and they coat animals, plants, they coat the bottom of the river. They're incredibly hard to get up, and after years of dredging under EPA direction, in fact, there is still tar sands left in the Kalamazoo River, and we have colleagues who still live in that area who say, yes, you can go down to the river and you can still see it. And we visited there last year, there was still evidence of that. So there's still some left. This National Academy of Sciences report also indicated that it's much more expensive to clean up. For example, if you look at regular crude oil, it costs about $2,000 per barrel to clean up. For tar sand spills, it's $29,000 per barrel to clean up. And just FYI, a barrel is 42 gallons, so a barrel is an awful lot of stuff. And so NAS has said that spills require special response strategies and tactics. And they've indicated that, in fact, there are no good proven tactics that are going to be able to reliably, in the future, clean up after tar sand spills. So first responders, anyone actually trying to clean up these spills is going to be kind of going out on a limb, because it's still kind of experimental, and they can't prove for sure that this stuff is clean upable. And so far, it hasn't been. I'm from Texas, so I got this cartoon a couple of years ago from the Fort Worth Weekly, and this is just an example here. They weren't talking necessarily about tar sands, but they were talking about dangerous oil pipelines which can rupture. And here you see this delightful cowboy who's really enjoying himself riding the back of a badly ruptured oil pipeline, and he's carefree without any problems. But in fact, the people, the animals, the groundwater, all of nature around a spill is going to be in trouble. And the point here was made that roads have to be insured, people have to be insured with their cars, but pipelines with their history of leaks and explosions, not so much. And in fact, Enbridge has definitely resisted very strongly in Wisconsin and other places people's call for insurance to make sure that there is cleanup afterwards. I'd like to shift now and talk a little bit about health effects of tar sands spills. Now, we've all seen these types of pictures, these very sad waterfowl that are seen on the right after the Kalamazoo spill. I do not know whether these animals were able to survive afterwards because they were very, very badly coated, as you can see. But I want to talk in particular about risk to people, whether you're young, old, white, black, whether you're a baby, whether you're a mom, whether you're pregnant. People are at risk if there is a tar sand spill. What I'm showing you here is a list of the chemicals used to dilute tar sands. These are called diluents, as Elizabeth pointed out. This is data actually from Enbridge that was given to us as part of our interaction with them on the Dane County Board. They did release this information, so we do have what was previously considered to be proprietary information by tar sands pipeline people like Enbridge and others. It was considered proprietary, but we do have access to that, and I'm happy to send this to anyone who would like it. We have copies of this. And you can see that the diluents are all kind of nasty sounding chemicals. And in fact, as a chemist, I've worked with quite a few of these in the lab myself, including benzene, but with great care. I'm circling benzene here, even though it's only about 1 to 1.8% of what's actually present in the diluting chemicals. But I've circled it here because it is particularly dangerous. But you can just see there's a whole mix of a whole bunch of different compounds, and these are all volatile, and that's why when there is a spill, these things evaporate into the atmosphere and make people sick. When people are exposed to benzene, it's not only might you have acute effects that we'll discuss in a moment, but benzene is a carcinogen. That is, it's cancer-causing. That's the symbol for something that's cancer-causing that's shown on the right, and as I've said, it's very volatile. In addition, it's a teratogen, which means that it causes birth defects. So that is a danger, of course, for pregnant women or women who don't even know they're pregnant yet, but who are in the early stages of pregnancy. So it causes cancer, and it's dangerous for pregnant women. In terms of acute effects of tar sand spills, and a lot of this is due to, again, the diluents in the atmosphere, but from tar sands themselves, if you get any on you. And in Kalamazoo, there were actually quite a few people that actually did get some tar sands on them around the time of the spill. Headaches, the acute effects tend to be headache, breathing difficulty, cough, nausea and vomiting, as well as harmful effects to the eyes and irritation around the eyes. In Kalamazoo, I think the Michigan Department of Community Health did a reasonable study here of acute health effects. What they did was they took, and you can see this is in blue here, they took a community of people who were not directly exposed. They were far enough away from the spill so they could be considered not to be exposed to the effects of these evaporated chemicals. They also looked at communities that were nearby, 4 different communities, and this is combined values in red. What you can see is that the number of people that were exposed on the left, of the 550 total that were exposed, 58% of these people actually had some symptoms. So a majority had symptoms, and some had 1 symptom, many had 2 or 3 symptoms, or even 4+ symptoms. So people who are exposed to this, and this is not somebody standing right over the river. This goes way out into the community, because these chemicals, once they evaporate, they spread, of course, all over the place because they're in the air, and people can have these side effects. And these are just the acute things. It has nothing to say with people's cancer risk down the road. In terms of long-term exposure, people who are living in the industrial tar sands development zone in Alberta, as Elizabeth has shown you, that very nasty looking moonscape after you take off the overburden that is the beautiful forest. When people are working there and exposed to the tar sands because they're digging them up and so forth, and then also using diluents at some point, the longer and greater exposure to all these toxins that people have. This includes not just the benzene and all the other diluent chemicals, but also heavy metals like arsenic, for example, and hydrogen sulfide, which is a very nasty smelling and in sufficient concentration, very dangerous gas. And these individuals have increased rates of blood cancers, such as leukemias. They have more lymphomas, and they have other solid organ cancers that are at a higher rate than you would expect in the unexposed population. There are some Alberta water supplies as well. The water exceeds the standards that should be present there for chemicals that are linked to cancer, genetic damage, birth defects, and organ damage. So in other words, the water supplies in Alberta, some of them, the water supplies themselves are already contaminated and dangerous to human beings or anyone who drinks them. In addition, Tar sands development is associated with increasing levels of methyl mercury in Alberta's waterways. And let me remind you, you know, you might have always, way back in the old days when there used to be metallic mercury in thermometers, they said to the mom, don't worry so much if you break the thermometer. Get the mercury out of the kid's mouth. It comes out in these little metallic, you know, globules. Get rid of it, get it out of the kid's mouth, rinse it out good. But it's not really going to be horribly harmful. You don't have to hospitalize this child. But in fact, when it's connected to mercury, to the methyl group, methyl mercury is incredibly toxic, and people have been killed by this. In fact, in labs when they're doing research on it, it's incredibly dangerous, and now it's in the water in Alberta. There are also rising cancer rates in First Nation communities, increased incidence of cancer in Fort Chippewa, Alberta. Over a long period of years, people found this. Scientists see increased cancer rates over this, 30% higher than would be typically expected. And one of the physicians in Alberta who has studied this has called for further investigation, but to date there's not been an independent study of these cancers despite repeated calls by tribal people. Senator Boxer had worked previously on highlighting the risk of these tar sands oil, and the National Academy of Sciences, in a different study from the one I described earlier, has indicated that the expanding tar sands activities in Canada have increased air pollution near Fort McMurray and just outside Edmonton, Alberta, and this is way before the fires we know about now, and that environmental impact studies that were actually done by the tar sands industry systematically underestimated this pollution. Gee willikers, who would have thunk it? There are also oil spills in Wisconsin as well as in other parts of the continent due to Enbridge. The Polaris Institute several years ago came out with a study where they enumerated all these spills. There were more than 800 spills attributable to Enbridge. Some of the notable spills in Wisconsin, some were from 2007 and one from 2012, which showed that there was one release of more than 50,000 gallons of crude oil, and that forced the evacuation and forfeiture, basically, of some homes. And when you do have a spill, you end up having to basically dig up and toss out and bury or somehow dispose of, in this particular case, 46,000 tons of soil. So it just gives you an idea of what kind of a cleanup and damage is due there.
And I'm going to, this is Elizabeth again, and we did just have a question asked, and so want to clarify what the word is. So there's diluent, which is D-I-L-U-E-N-T, and that is the diluents, and then there's bitumen, which is what another name for tar sands oil. So often what you'll hear the tar sands oil that flows through the pipeline called is dilbit, as in diluted bitumen. So there was a question just to clarify.
Yeah, it's a compound word. Like you say, diluted and then diluent and then bitumen, so it's dilbit.
Moving on, one of the reasons these spills are really concerning is because of the number of waterways that this pipeline crosses through. So the pipelines actually go under the waterways, but oftentimes either because of erosion of the bed or they're not drilled that deep below the waterway, as you could see in the picture from the line 5. There are serious threats posed to the waterways and what would happen if there were a spill that either happened at one of these riverway crossings or near it that eventually got into the riverway, like what happened with the Kalamazoo spill. So the pipeline, of course, starts right on the shores of Lake Superior, again, part of the critical Great Lakes network. And then it travels south. It actually crosses the St. Croix Riverway in 3 different places. This is very concerning, given that's actually a national wildlife river and scenic way. And so this is a really important place, not only for the quality of life for the region, but also for the tourism economy that helps keep part of northern Wisconsin going. Further south, it crosses through the Wisconsin River right above the Crystal Lake and Pettenwell Lake area. And then finally, down in southern Wisconsin, it crosses the Rock River. A spill in any one of these areas that impacted the riverway would not only devastate that waterway and potentially the fish and people who live off of the waterway, but also the economy and the quality of life. People choose to live near these places because they're beautiful and because they enjoy their life there. And now I want to go into why is this happening. So it is not happening because Wisconsin needs more oil. We didn't wake up 5 years ago and say we need double the amount of oil in Wisconsin than we have now. In fact, the opposite is happening. Wisconsin is actually using a lot less oil than it has, and that's because Wisconsinites are driving less for a variety of reasons, whether it's younger people who are preferring to live in cities and not drive, or aging people in rural areas who are outliving their ability to drive. And then additionally, our cars are getting much more energy efficient. This is happening, as Enbridge confirmed, because Enbridge was the first company who actually applied to re-export this oil. So that means because it's imported into the United States, they want to then export it at the Gulf overseas where it'll be more economical. And what's happening is there's this big demand to get this oil down south. In the northeastern part of the country, the ports in Maine and other areas have actually blocked the tar sands oil export through ordinances and a couple of other means to ensure that it can't be exported there. The same thing's happening at the Pacific Northwest, where there have been a number of campaigns to stop the export of both oil and coal from those ports. And we all saw late last year the Obama administration rejected the Keystone Pipeline. That means Wisconsin is left to be this corridor for this oil to flow through Wisconsin and DC, through this network of pipelines, and eventually get the oil down south. An NRDC, so Natural Resources Defense Council report, actually found that 2/3 of the tar sands oil refined in Gulf Coast refineries are exported. This is one of the reasons that you'll often hear people talk about whether or not pipelines are better than rail or vice versa. It doesn't matter to these companies. They will continue to put proposals to ship as much oil as possible through the pipeline, through rail, and even some proposals to ship via barge over Lake Superior, because the goal is to get as much of that oil as possible out of that tar sands deposit and ship it south. We don't need this oil, though. We don't need it in Wisconsin, and we don't need any of this. This oil is really all risk and no reward to us, but of the kind of benefits that are touted for pipelines tends to be jobs. But we know that megawatt per megawatt, dollar per dollar, clean energy creates more jobs than fossil fuels. And the clean energy economy is here. We just need to embrace it. So in 2014, over half of the new electricity installed across America was clean energy. It was wind or solar. And even last year, the first half of last year, 75% of new energy installed was made up by wind and solar. In Germany, new reports are coming out now that they actually are producing too much clean energy and are actually giving away that energy. Even in Wisconsin, we're seeing this. We've got huge installments of solar popping up all over the place, businesses installing solar, and as well as some huge land contracts coming to, or wind contracts coming to Wisconsin and some of our big wind developers. And if you think that's surprising given our political reality, even in Alberta, home of the tar sands development, there are more clean energy jobs than there are fossil fuel jobs. So this is what we need to be going, and this is the path we need to go. And the trend across the United States is on our side. And so we just need to embrace it. And with that, we want to thank everybody, and we're going to go to questions. So I'm going to stop recording.